So there's Israel's growth from 1950. It says 52, but it starts at 50 till 2009 over here. Now, I don't want to get into the mathematics. Those of you who study economics, you have enough math already. This is not US dollars over here. I'm looking at the trend. So what should interest you in this graph is the slope angle, which represents the growth rate. So it's very intuitive looking at where this graph goes. Now we can start analyze that graph, and you obviously see that there are two periods here with this little threshold right here in the center. But any economist might stop you right then and there and say, wait a minute, you want to look at growth for a country, it's not good enough to look at GDP growth. Because obviously GDP can have a lot of implications. And what you should look at is GDP per capita. Meaning take the growth and divide it in the population. So it's not how much the United States produces, it's how much every American gets. Okay? That's the difference. Now, why is it relevant for Israel? Because obviously, if you studied about the economy of this place, you know all about the immigration waves, right? You know that people came to this place in masses. And in the 50s, we used to, I think we even doubled our population in a few years. That's historically and comparatively, it's an amazing fact. And in the 90s, we had a seventh of the population coming from the former USSR. So any economist might, guess, you want to look at Israel, you take the GDP, divided by the population, you'll see a lot of shocks. Because people came in masses, and obviously when you have a lot of people coming in a short time, then the same product is divided by more, so each and every one gets less, right? I mean, sounds logic, right? Okay, so we should expect to see shocks, major shocks if you look at Israeli history. But actually, interestingly, when you take GDP per capita, you get an even more extreme version of the same graph. Okay, so what it means is, you see a little bit of shocks here. You see this. This is the 50s right here. You see the 60s right here. And you see the beginning of the 2000s right here. And you see the 90s, we had a big immigration wave. So you see a little bit of those, but you don't see a major break in the trend. And that's very impressive when economists look at a market. Because what they see is consistent growth. They look at the average and they say, if this is Israeli growth over its history in per capita terms, then in the first period we grew at around 5% a year. That's the number right here. Then there's this threshold in the beginning of the 70s. Think of the crisis that came in the 80s. Maybe this is when it was born. We could have gone this way, but it started to decline. And then we grow at around 1.5% a year. What does this figure mean? 1.5% a year is roughly the world average growth rate of the developed world. So you might say that in the beginning, since our independence, we were catching up very fast with the rest of the world, and then we started to grow with the world. But you obviously don't see the major shocks I would have expected to see in such a graph, taking the big aliyah and the big immigration waves, and the fact that we face severe geopolitical situations. So economists tend to look at this. So that's GDP growth.